Madam Speaker, I was caught a bit off guard because I expected more from the Minister of Local Government. I didn't expect him. I expected him to last a little longer. So excuse my disappointment, but Madam Speaker, the inability of the Minister to articulate to this Parliament and to this nation a proper justification for the formation of the Borough of Siparia and Martin is reflective of a government who is rushing to pretend to care about local government because a local government election is due. Madam Speaker, in governance, there is a definition for municipality. And a municipality is a government unit responsible for providing certain types of services within a specific boundary. A municipality is a specific geographic area where the residents and the authorities are responsible for certain things. A municipality is governed by elected officials. You have a mayor, you have a chairman, you have their council members. And thanks to the UNC government, you have proportional representation for aldermen. Municipalities have a different degree of autonomy based on a tiered system, regional corporations, cities, or boroughs. And of course, that influences their decision-making, their budget, and the services that they provide. We have to examine in the government's proposal to change the name of a budget, whether this bill is nothing more than a superficial attempt to pretend to do something for local government once again. There are best practices when it comes to designation of a borough. There are examples of boroughs in the world where service delivery is top class. But more so, regardless of the result, we have to look at the principle behind what is a borough. In New York City, the 5 boroughs in New York are considered to be one of the best practices in the United States. These boroughs are responsible for providing essential services to their residents, yes, in terms of water management, parks and recreation and so on. In London as well, you have 32 boroughs in London. And they are also considered in terms of best practice for the United Kingdom. And they also provide the services. But they are named boroughs for a specific reason. I want to ask, the minister did not really articulate to us why Siparia and Martin were selected. What was your approach in terms of your methodological framework that was utilized? What developmental studies and guidelines were utilized to make this decision? What consultations were conducted? The answer is none. You must have substantial development plans for an area that is designated as a borough. You must have clearly outlined objectives. You must have objectives that tie into the national agenda. You must have objectives that are sustainable, that tie into our objectives as a nation, as part of the United Nations agreements, that would also bring benefit to the national growth and economy of this country. And you failed to articulate that today. Madam Speaker, the minister failed to indicate to us how the change in status from taking an eraser and rubbing off the name regional, replace it with the name borough, and to tell us how that will bring about greater economic human, infrastructural, and development in Siparia and Diego Martin. How will this change impact on the community? You know, I listened to the minister, and I think he had some good researchers advise him, but it's clear that he didn't have a firm understanding of what would happen, what is required for the naming of a borough. Madam Speaker, I want to just go a bit into what happens in this country and what the minister, unfortunately, has governed over in his past year or so as a minister of local government. There was a draft report, a report on the draft white paper of local government in 2003, and it documented the strengths and weaknesses of local government in Trinidad and Tobago. One of the weaknesses that was identified still exists today. So while we will have one thing in legislation, in practice, what we can have is outside of the legislation, a lack of funding for state mandates and regulations. So for example, recently, we had in 2019, because of this government's incompetence, the EFCL was shut down. And the Minister of Local Government, then Kazim Hussein, instructed the regional corporations to conduct maintenance, to do maintenance work on schools, a mandate that they were not equipped for, that they did not have resources
Madam
for.
Speaker, standing order 48-1, please.
Okay, I'll give you some leeway. I'll give you some leeway.
Thank you. There's a school in St. Joseph constituency called the St. Joseph Secondary School that the member who is asking about relevance should pay some attention to. It is very relevant here, sir. Madam Speaker, regional corporations were mandated by the government to maintain schools, a task that they were never given the resources for. And this is an example of where the government's mandates and regulations can be something negative in terms of the, a weakness to local government administration. When you have a lack of cohesion from central government to local government, when it comes to planning and economic development at the local level, you have each regional corporation having a regional development plan. These regional development plans were developed under one government, adopted by another government, and they had served over several governments.
48-1.
Yeah. So member, I said I'll give you some leeway, but I really need you to tie that into what this is the purport of this particular bill that is before us.
Certainly. The lack of cohesion in terms of planning and development and economic development has to do with the fact that the government is presently ignoring the regional development plans. And when we speak about naming Siparia and Diego Martin from regional corporation to borough corporation, it means that their development plan should be changing as well. That is not happening. We see a lack of vision and strategic thinking by councils being named as a weakness in that report that I mentioned before. Madam Speaker, it is important for the national plans of the country to tie in to the regional plans, whether it is a regional corporation or a borough. If you upgrade an area, so to speak, from being a regional corporation to a borough, it means that you have to upgrade the plans. We in the opposition have spoken about the UNC's economic transformation plan that includes economic drivers in different regions that tie into the recovery of the national economy. What is the economic driver to increase commercial activity? What is unique to Siparia and Diego Martin corporations?
Member, if you, I will allow the member for St. Augustine a little more leeway. I think with a little patience, she's getting there. I think she's getting there.
Thank you. So, Madam Speaker, while the UNC has clearly articulated our economic transformation plan that ties into the regions, the government has failed to articulate how the change in status to borough will feed into the national economy through commercial activities and local economic development within those areas. So, I mean, if we have to get specifically, in Siparia, you have a festival called the Siparia Festival, which really is a national gem. This is something that Siparia becomes a mecca, so to speak, around that time. And it is unique festivals like these that, you can build around when you speak about improving an area from being a regional corporation to a borough, because you are now speaking about creating a space that could host a national festival. You are speaking about creating local tourism and what is required to improve that area, to facilitate such. If you're talking about tourism, and it ties in, of course, to the government's national tourism agenda. So it is not far-fetched at all. What are the conditions of the roads to Siparia to go to the Siparia Festival? Ask yourself that. What resources have been provided? I noticed that the minister spoke a lot about the amount of money allocated to Siparia. He said that Siparia asked for 104 million and they got 88 million. He said that in his contribution. You didn't tell us how much Diego Martin asked for. You didn't tell us how much Diego Martin get. And I can tell you that every regional corporation got less than they requested because this government does not see local government as important. Madam?
I can give you the answer now.
Madam Speaker, I want to move now. I want to move now to sharing a real-life example. I sat as the chairman of Tunapuna Piako Corporation. I was a councillor for 3 years there.
Remember, this is not a full local government debate, okay? This is about making 2 municipalities the status of borough. So I've allowed you a lot of leeway, to paint your picture, but I want us now to focus on the specifics, okay? Please.
Certainly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the minister would have mentioned the population of Diego Martin and Siparia corporations. Diego Martin is roughly 89, the electorate size is 89,000, but the population size is 102,000. Siparia is a little under that. I want to share my experience with Tunapuna Piako Corporation because even before I became chairman, there are several stakeholders and interest groups who were lobbying for Tunapuna Piako to become a borough, at least to have the Tunapuna borough and maybe the Piako region.
Madam Speaker, standing order 48, this is about Diego Martin and Siparia.
Yeah, so remember, unless you're going to show how that affects, and I'll give a little, 1 minute to do that, but as again, a general observation, we are not debating local government in its entirety, okay?
Yes. Madam Speaker, I want to share the experience that I have had with lobbying for a borough, for an area to be designated as a borough. And it brings again the question into the government's explanation or justification to how they arrived at Siparia and Diego Martin to become boroughs. So I want to just explain that, in fact, the member for Tunapuna was also, I think, part of would have been engaged in that lobby where the Tunapuna Chamber and others. And, Madam, the Minister of Local Government spoke about several features of the Diego Martin Corporation. For instance, he said it was bounded by the beautiful sea, the beauty of the sea. He spoke about the presence of malls and plazas. All of those things are present in Tunapuna Piako, which comes from the North Coast and Blanchisseuse. And it includes the Piako International Airport, the only international airport in Trinidad and Tobago. It includes the Eric Williams Medical Sciences Complex, and it has the highest population of all
Madam
regional
Speaker,
corporations.
please,
So
Standing
my
Order 48.1. It is not about Tunapuna Piako.
And Member for St. Augustine, I have to agree with the points on Standing Order 48.1. I'm giving you more than sufficient, leeway. And really, I'll have to ask you to move on and deal with the matters that are here. Oh, please, I'll be dealing with Siparia and Diego Martin.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I was responding to the Minister's point about the features in Diego Martin that made it qualify. And I'm saying that there are other regions that also qualify. I will
rule that we're not talking about other regions. I've asked you to deal with Diego Martin and Siparia, please.
So, Madam Speaker, just the reasons given by the ministers are rendered mute because they also apply to other areas that the government has not made into boroughs today. So, Madam Speaker, I thought the reasons given by the minister were really weak, and therefore, if we are to go by those reasons, to me, I think the most densely populated regional corporation should be first on the list to become a borough. Now, Madam Speaker, a borough is usually an area that is a concentrated area of targeted development. It is usually a commercial center with supporting services. So when we think about the size of an electoral district at present in the regional corporations, the electoral districts are about 10,000 electors, and you can have up to 20,000 residents. In a borough, however, you have about 3,000 electors. You, however, have a huge population of persons who work and own and operate businesses and so on within the boroughs. The electorate in a borough is usually less than half that of those in the regional corporations. So the boroughs are usually smaller because they are focused, concentrated areas of development. I give an example of Arima, which is a borough which is surrounded by Tunapuna Piako region, but it is a small, focused area. If you took the town center of Tunapuna and created a borough, it will be surrounded by the outlying areas such as Blanchisseuse and Paria and so on, which would remain, in theory, should remain as part of the regional corporation, and you still maintain that tiered system of local government. But to take an entire regional corporation that has focused areas such as commercial centers, rural areas, and everything, and lump it all into one and name it a borough defeats the purpose of it being a focused development area. And it means that the government really does not know what it is doing by bringing this superficial name change. Madam Speaker, the minister mentioned as far back as the Royal Chartered Borough in terms of giving us history, and the most recent area to be granted borough status in Trinidad and Tobago would have been the Chaguanas Borough Corporation in 1990. Again, this was granted because there was tremendous growth. There was increasing population, there was commercial activity, there was rapid infrastructural development in an area, and therefore it could be identified as a clear growth pole. And that would have been the justification at that time for a focused, centralized area to be named a borough, and therefore the borough corporation would have the amenities to support that. There were clear indicators that led to the decision, unlike what we are seeing today. Madam Speaker, I don't know if the PNM at that time supported the change of status in Chaguanas, but it might be useful for the members opposite to look at the contributions from the House at that time to see what the rationale and the thinking was behind the creation of the borough of Chaguanas back in 1990. It was not just a name change. There are changes in terms of the administrative practices and so on, but Madam Speaker, my distinguished colleague and sister, member for Chaguanas East, was served with distinction as the mayor of Chaguanas at some time, and when she comes in her contribution, she may go more into Chaguanas Borough. So, but I beg the members opposite to just look at the contributions, if you can access it, of what the members at that time in the Parliament contemplated to create the Borough of Chaguanas. Madam Speaker, very recently, in this week, you had a situation where the Prime Minister, I think it's local government sort of hit home for the Prime Minister. I saw where he had indicated that, that his house was threatened because of a regional corporation that did not have cement and gravel to do construction of a box drain. The very thing that the PNM likes to make fun of the UNC about, constructing box drain, and all the Prime Minister house nearly fall down. Ironically, the regional corporation that was chastised is the Diego Martin Regional Corporation, and today this Diego Martin Corporation is set to become a borough. Would granting borough status to Diego Martin ensure that they have the finances and they do the work? If that is the case, then why not grant borough status to all the regional corporations? I thought the Minister of Local Government would have taken the opportunity to account for the failure of the Diego Martin Regional Corporation and the Ministry of Local Government that caused the Prime Minister's home to nearly collapse. I asked the question, why does Diego Martin Regional Corporation have no sand and gravel? Is it because of your failure, Minister? The regional corporations...
So, Member, please, let's get on. Let's get on with the debate, please.
Yes. Madam Speaker, I think the minister very cleverly in his contribution sort of addressed it, because he indicated that some people do not know that regional corporations have no jurisdictions in certain areas. And he may have been referring to the gated community where the Prime Minister lives. So maybe the Prime Minister was wrong to blame local government.
Member, I've warned you a number of times. Please get back on track. If not, I'll have to invoke my powers.
Certainly. Madam Speaker, I mentioned earlier about having a specific focused area of development and for strategic plans to tie in with the national plans. In 2010, the UNC adopted the 14 strategic plans, one for each regional corporation. And each of these had specific items and plans to be developed. The question is whether the government has reviewed the strategic development plans, and if so, who they have reviewed it with. Because the strategic development plans were not formed by sitting and talking to the council members. The consultants at that time was Kyrie Consultants, and they spent a lot of time speaking to many stakeholders. So if you are looking to upgrade an area from being a regional corporation to a borough, certainly the strategic development plan has to be upgraded as well. Do you plan to do the upgrade after you make the change, the superficial name change in law, or before? It should be that these things should inform the legislation. It should be that there's consultation, there's a strategic development plan that says, let us focus in this area, and therefore, let us upgrade it to a borough status. So the government is putting the cart before the horse at this time. I want to ask, Madam, whether the government has done any consultation at all with the... Now, I want to just put on the record, a minister of government going and meeting with a council is not proper consultation. A minister can attend any meeting of a regional corporation at any time, and if then Minister Kazim Hussain found himself visiting Siparia to mention to them, oh, by the way, it's on the agenda for you to become a borough. That is not consultation. You must engage You must engage communities, you must engage village councils, religious organizations, the chambers, for the business chambers and business owners, taxi driver associations, sporting groups, cultural organizations, and so on. Madam Speaker, when Siparia and Diego Martin becomes a regional corporation, the minister in his contribution mentioned that one of the things that will change is in terms of the traffic regulations that they will be subjected to. The boroughs usually have a greater complement of staff. So, for instance, municipal police. The boroughs usually have more municipal police because they have to do more enforcement. They usually have, in terms of building code enforcement, and particularly with the new legislation with the local government reform, that gives the regional corporations more power. Because, again, the borough is supposed to be subject to different planning codes and so on to encourage commercial development and so on. You may have, for instance, in the zoning in terms of whether you have 2-story, 3-story buildings, the setbacks and so on would be different. And therefore, the complement of staff and the expertise of the staff to enforce building codes within a borough would be or should be different. Boroughs usually have more resources because they are required to do much more in terms of the standards of the infrastructure. What are the conditions of the pavements, the roads, the potholes? If an area is designated as a borough, it is expected that you will have a better quality roads, parks, bridges. You should not have Siparia High Street, the bank having to close because High Street floods. It means just saying that we are going to change the name and give you more money is not enough. You must have had a strategic plan to inform the change of status. You must have a specific designated area that is called a borough so that you can focus your development there. Your situation where I noticed that the government is very sneakily in mentioning the...
Sneakily?
Oh, okay.
Please, just withdraw that.
Thank you. I withdraw the word sneaky. Madam Speaker, I noticed...
Just withdraw the word and don't say it again. You
Withdrawn.
Please.
Madam Speaker, I noticed that the government has made mention a couple times of property tax. And again, it seems as though they continue to push the agenda that the government, that the people of this country must pay for their incompetence.
I'd like to tell you, you have 2 more minutes of original time. You're entitled to 15 more minutes, if you wish, as extended time. Again, I ask you please to keep in focus the legislation that is before us. I also wish to advise for your going forward to be careful about tedious repetition. So thus far, there are 2 points that you've really developed so that in going forward, please develop something else other than the strategic plan and also the issue with respect to the small focused area. Okay?
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I want to, in spite of the minister's indicating in his contribution that this bill does not interfere with the boundaries, I want us as citizens, us as members in this House, to be on alert, because it is very likely that the government will come today and say, don't worry, there's no need for a boundary change, and then later on they will come forward to say that there is need for a boundary change. Because because it is normal for regional corporations and boroughs to have different sizes of electoral districts in terms of the numbers of persons, and therefore the boundaries of those boroughs will have to be approved by Parliament, but then the EBC will step in to decide on the electoral districts. So we must not relax. We must keep this government accountable, and we must not relax and take their word that there will be no changes, boundary changes, and the EBC will not intervene in the future, even though not in this legislation. Madam Speaker, so what is there for this Parliament to do? I honestly would love to see some of the present regional corporations upgraded to borough status, but I would like to see them done properly.
Madam Speaker, Standing Order 48.1 and 55.1b. She has traversed this issue several times.
So, member, I believe you're going on to another point, so please go on. Yes. Go on.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there are several members of Parliament in this current Parliament who would have had experience as local government representatives, either as elected councillors, aldermen, head of municipality, chairman or mayor. And I think that we have enough expertise available amongst the members, as well as persons in society who are willing to contribute. And there's no shame in saying, let us develop this bill properly and let us develop it further, because what is presented here really is not, to me, it is not acceptable to just have a superficial name change. So the options that the government would have is to completely withdraw it and go back to the drawing board, and of course come back with something more holistic. The government could also send this bill to a joint select committee, and that will allow proper deliberation. I mean, the intent may have been good, but the result, what we have before here, is really unacceptable. A JSC would allow for consultations to take place, for expertise to be brought in. It would allow for properly constructed legislation to be brought forward. Or, madams,
you know, I know generally in the country we might be in a very relaxed mood at this time, but I'll ask members to recognize where we are and respect the contributions of their colleague. Continue.
Thank you. So, Madam Speaker, in conclusion, we have three options before us. The government can withdraw and go back to the drawing board and come with proper legislation. The government can send this bill to a joint select committee and allow that joint select committee to properly deliberate and have consultations with stakeholders and experts in the field. Or we as a parliament could allow this government to use its majority to bring into law poorly drafted legislation that would make a superficial name change, and when the UNC comes in government, we will have to fix it. Madam Speaker, the record shows that the local government fares better under the United National Congress. We have had proportional representations. We have had offices for secretaries and councillors. We have had more money and resources and expertise to all regional corporations.
Again, remember, I've said repeatedly, we're not doing a general local government debate.
And, Madam Speaker, all of these are things that areas where the minister has suggested to become boroughs should be benefiting from, regardless of name change or not. Madam Speaker, I am looking forward to the members really being mature about making boroughs out of regional corporations in Trinidad and Tobago, but I am not hopeful because we have seen what really is an abuse and undermining of local government by the central government of this People's National Movement. With those few words, Madam Speaker, I thank you.